My name is Paige Mercer. When I was 25 years old, my parents took me out to a fancy dinner to tell me I was adopted. My mother had a smile on her face when she said they had only kept me all those years because of the money and benefits they received from the government. Now that I was an adult, she told me I wasn't useful to them anymore. My father pushed legal papers across the white tablecloth toward me. They had already visited a lawyer to make sure I was cut out of their will entirely. I didn't cry when I heard this. I didn't say a single word for a full minute, but there was a secret neither of them knew. 6 months before that dinner, I had already found my real birth family, and that very night, I had invited them to sit at a table just 3 rows behind my mother's chair. She simply hadn't turned around to see them yet. What happened when she finally did is the reason I am sitting here today, 6 years later, sharing this story with you. The restaurant was an expensive place called Vindication. I had never been there in my life. My mother chose it, and that alone should have told me something was wrong. Diane Mercer never spent money on me, without a very specific reason behind it. That night, she wore a gray wool sweater, the kind she reserved for funerals or serious business meetings. My father, Wesley, had booked the table under her name, not mine. I noticed this the moment the woman at the front desk asked for a name, and he answered before I could open my mouth. There was no birthday sign, no balloons, no cake waiting in the back with my name written in frosting. For a birthday dinner, the table looked strangely empty. My parents were stiff with each other, painfully polite, like 2 people waiting to hear a judge read a verdict. I had spent 4 years working in offices exactly like this one, booking tables for clients and for families who needed to discuss what happens when someone dies and money needs to change hands. I knew the difference between a happy celebration and a cold business transaction, and this dinner felt as cold as stone, because the room felt so unwelcoming. I did what I always do when I am nervous. I focus on my breathing and look for the exits. That was when I spotted a small brass number on a table behind us and to the left. Table 9. I kept that number quietly in my mind, the way you mark a point on a map, so you can find your way back to it later. I set a plain brown folder on the table beside my water glass. My mother glanced at it, but seemed to think nothing of it, probably assuming it was a resume or a birthday card. She had no idea what was actually inside. To understand why their coldness didn't shock me, you need to know what birthdays were like in our house growing up. My birthday meant 1 candle. Not as a tradition, just a single candle pressed into a cheap grocery store cupcake my mother would leave on the counter while she talked on the phone. 3 weeks later, my cousin Brett would have a massive party with a bouncy house and silver trays of food. Brett was my Aunt Renee's son, and in our family Brett was blood. When I turned 8, and asked if I could have a real party too, my aunt answered for my mother. She said very sweetly that they could only afford 1 nice thing a month. That soft, kind voice delivering a cruel message taught me more than anything else ever did. I learned that people can sound warm while they are telling you that you don't matter. So I did the math. A cupcake is cheaper than a party. A child who never asks for anything is cheaper than one who expects to be treated equally. By the time I was 9, I had stopped asking for cake. I told myself it made things easier for the adults, and being easy felt like the only way to hold on to whatever small place I had with them. That is what happens when you grow up feeling like your value must be earned. You don't realize people have put a price tag on you until they begin reading the numbers out loud. I left my parents' house the week I turned 18. 2 bags of clothes and a college acceptance letter. I filled out all the paperwork myself. Nobody drove me there. I worked nights at a pharmacy counter and attended classes in the mornings. Later, I transferred to a bigger school and completed a legal assistant program while waitressing on weekends. I paid for every bit of it on my own. By 25, I was skilled and steady at a downtown law firm, spending my days studying how wealthy people protect and move their money, writing the documents that decide who inherits what when someone is gone. I could read a legal paper the way other people read a person's face. The sad part was that even though I helped strangers set the terms of their lives, I couldn't find the courage to ask my own family simply to love me. The one exception was my grandmother, Nana Ruth. I called her every Sunday at 4 o'clock, and she was the only Mercer who sounded genuinely happy when the phone rang. She was my father's mother strong and plain-spoken, and she was the only adult who ever made me feel like a real person rather than an expense they were managing. When I was 12 and my cousin Brett told me I wasn't a real Mercer, Nana held my face in her hands and said, "You were chosen, sweetheart, not collected." Then she made me a grilled cheese sandwich. Nana Ruth passed away when I was 23, and at her funeral, I was the only one who spoke about who she actually was as a person. Within a month, my parents had moved out of their house and into Nana's beautiful home on Linden Road. I was too deep in grief to think much about it at the time, but I remembered something she had said to me on the phone before she died. "I made sure you will never have to ask anyone for your own life." I thought she was simply encouraging me. I didn't understand yet that she had written it down. In the year before my 25th birthday, my family turned strange and quiet in a way that felt deliberate. Texts that used to take an hour to receive took 3 days. My mother stopped including me in holiday planning, and then seemed genuinely surprised when I arrived at Thanksgiving without a dish. My Aunt Renee began using the word blood constantly, mentioning blood-only weekends at the lake and cabins that could only fit blood relatives. I understood exactly what she was saying. Families don't go cold like that without a reason. This felt coordinated. So when my mother called in March with a voice that was much too sweet, my stomach dropped rather than lifted. She only called me honey when she wanted something. She said they wanted to take me out for a proper birthday dinner. Do it right this time. My instincts told me a trap was closing. I said yes, but then I sat at my own kitchen table and thought about everything carefully. The house they had moved into, the constant talk of blood, Nana's words, and the folder I had been quietly putting together for months because I needed to know where I truly came from. I didn't call them to argue. I made my own quiet calls instead. I have a rule. When my mother is being sweet, someone is about to lose something. I made sure it wasn't going to be me. Sitting in my car outside Vanter that night, I wasn't afraid of losing money. I was afraid of losing the only home I'd ever known, as cold and conditional as it was. If they cut me off, I would be exactly what Brett once said, just a girl who'd been picked up and put back down. But they didn't know I wasn't that girl anymore. I walked in feeling calm, because I already knew how the evening ended. We ordered drinks. My mother talked about the wine. Then she shifted into her serious voice and said they had always done their best for me, given me a roof and a school. I kept my hand on my folder. My father kept glancing at it, and I could see worry beginning to move across his face. Then my mother said it plainly. I was adopted, she told me. They had taken me as a baby. I wasn't really theirs. She waited for me to cry, and when I didn't, she said the thing that I believe was meant to finish me. She told me they had only kept me for the benefits, and she smiled when she said it. That smile was the moment I felt something release inside me, because it proved she wasn't a grieving mother delivering painful news. She was a woman who had finished using something and was ready to set aside. My father explained it in business terms. Government payments for the adoption, tax advantages, a grandmother who expected them to have a family. My childhood was arithmetic. The single candles and the hand-me-down clothes were ways to hold on to the extra money for themselves. The payments had now stopped because I was 25, and so I was no longer worth anything to them. He slid the papers toward me. They had hired a lawyer to cut me out of their will, he said, to avoid confusion later. But I could see immediately that they had made a serious mistake. They had paid to protect themselves from a small inheritance, while completely missing the much larger thing that was already mine. 6 months earlier, 2 things had changed everything. The first was a letter from a woman named Susan Hale, my birth mother, who had been only 19 when she gave me up and had never wanted to let me go. She wrote that she had never stopped saving me a seat. The second discovery came from my work with legal documents. I looked up the Ruth Mercer Family Trust and found a provision stating clearly that the payments my parents had been receiving to care for me would end on my 25th birthday, and that the house on Linden Road, along with everything else, would pass to me. My parents had been in a rush to get my signature on a document they hoped I wouldn't examine closely. They were trying to take the only thing Nana had ever given me. I had met Susan months before the dinner. She was gentle and genuine, wanting nothing from me except my presence in her life. For the first time, I understood what it felt like to be wanted rather than needed. So when my mother gestured toward the pen, I didn't pick it up. Instead, I asked my father quietly which document he had actually filed, his will or Nana's trust. The table went completely still. I opened my folder and laid everything out. My own lawyer's letter, the trust provisions, my original birth certificate. I told my mother she had cut me out of the wrong family, and that the one she was holding on to was much smaller than the one I had found. Her tone changed at once. She reached for my hand and called me family. She only remembered being my mother the moment she realized I held the house and the money. I stood up to leave. She told me to sit down, but I didn't. I told her my real family was sitting 3 tables behind her. She turned slowly, and there they were, Susan, Pearl, and Danny, all on their feet, not saying a word to my parents, simply standing so I could see them clearly. I walked away from the table where I had been managed my entire life and sat down at table 9 with the people who loved me. My mother began to shout about how much she had invested in me over the years. I sat quietly and held Susan's hand. I left my mother one final document to read, so she would understand that her time in Nana's house was finished. The trust did exactly what Nana had intended. The payments to my parents stopped and came to me instead. They had to leave the house because they couldn't sustain it without that income. I didn't pursue any legal action. I simply stopped answering. My father sent one text that said he was sorry. It arrived too late. I spent that birthday eating cake with Susan and her family, and I learned something I want you to carry with you. You do not have to earn your place with people who genuinely love you. If someone only wants you present when you are useful, they are not your family. Real family is the people who save you a seat simply because they want you there. That is my story, from one small candle to a table full of light.